Sutayramaniaha. Yepeti Odi Sutayramaniaha. Celebedieta Yetuniatoyo. Bodianaya Kundaya Mediciti. Nori Handia Ramaniaha de Sundaramaniaho. Yabadiate Ramaniaha de Sundaramane. Daya Humani Sintai. Nike Yakandaya Suto. Beramania Suntiaria. Madi Heniasa. Nihene Apatia. Sonderamania.
There's a new day coming, says the Lord. A new day, not just for you, for this is a general word. There's a new day coming on the church, the greater church. There is a move of the Spirit at hand. It will start in the United States. It will sweep the world. I will be faithful to those who have been faithful to me. There is a remnant, says the Lord. Even in this current age, there is a remnant. Remember the words of your friend from overseas, a rural rush. As goes the United States, goes the rest of the world. When the U.S. church is strong, others are strong throughout the world. I'm going to strengthen you. I'm going to fortify you. I'm going to look for churches that will sow into the body in general, that will be part of this greater move. Get ready for it. Get ready. Wax your surfboards. Get ready to ride that wave that's coming. Get ready to encourage others. This will be a ride that will be about the church in general. It will not focus on this church or that, but it'll be a general awakening of my body. There will be people going from one place to another to catch different aspects of what I'm doing in the earth. And I will do them, says the Lord. They will be of me. No one will be able to deny it. You are fighting. You are at the very forefront of this move. And don't be dismayed that there are those that speak against you, because you're trying to get into new realms of the Spirit. And more than the rabbis, more than some of the others that resist Christianity, you're feeling the body dragging itself, not wanting to get moving. But I will give you a wake-up call. I will give the church a wake-up call. And I will use you to do it. I will use others like you. Be excited about those who are pressing in to take new ground. Even if they are different from you, even if they have a different, slightly different vision. I am looking to stir all those who are trying to move into the various things I have for the church, capturing new ground, going to new places in the heavenly. Be excited, for this wave is coming. It will feed many bodies and create many new churches. It will be a great move of salvation. Keep praying, keep interceding, and keep looking at the big picture. For I take notice of you, says the Lord. And I have a place for you, says the Lord. And I will be with you, says the Lord.
Amen.
And I will use you and I will answer your prayers for a new move. And you will not be disappointed, says the Lord.
Who died and rose on high.
dreams, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep would break from him. And the king commanded to call the magicians and astrologers and the sorcerers and the Chaldeans, and to show the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said unto them, I had dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream. Then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac, O king, live forever, tell thy servants the dream, and we will show you the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the thing is gone from me. If you will make known unto me the dream, with the interpretation thereof, ye shall be, if you don't do it, you will be cut in pieces, and your houses made a dunghill. But if you show me the dream and the interpretation thereof, ye shall receive of me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore show me the dream and the interpretation thereof. So they start to argue. And they say there's nobody that can do that. At least in this particular instance. Their magic arts were of no avail. So eventually it gets to the place of verse 12. The king was angry and very furious and commanded to destroy all the wise men. And of course Daniel and his companions are at this point wise men. That's what they're trained to do. Their lives in jeopardy. Daniel comes forth and says, let me have a chance to interpret the dream. It convinces the king. He takes some time, and the next morning he's able to do it. Now we go down to verse 24 in chapter 2. Therefore Daniel went in unto Arioch, whom the king had ordained to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said unto them, destroy not the wise men of Babylon, bring me in before the king, and I will show unto the king the interpretation. Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste, and said unto him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah, who will make known unto the king the interpretation. The king answered and said unto Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, in the new names they had given him, art thou able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen, and the interpretation thereof? Daniel answered, yes. And he said, basically, I can't do it. There's a God in heaven who can do it. He goes down to verse 31, and here's what he says. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image, this great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible, terrifying. This image, his head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. Thou sawest still that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet, that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, and the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away, and no place was found for them. They basically disappeared, just like wheat chaff. So then going to verse 36, this is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation before the king. Thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field, and the fowls of the heaven, hath he given unto thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over all. Thou art his head of gold. And after thee shall rise another kingdom, inferior to thee, and a third kingdom of brass shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces, and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it be in pieces and bruised. And therefore thou sawest the feet and toes part of potter's clay and part of iron. The kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And the toes and the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so as the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And in those days the kings of these kings, the God of heaven, shall set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all the kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands,
and it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold. He saw this vision of this marvelous idol, this statue of various metals. And then there was a huge boulder cut out of a mountain, and it struck this idol in the feet. The entire idol fell to pieces and was blown away like chaff. Now the subject we're going to talk about today is King Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the spiritual course of the times of the Gentiles. So he has a dream about something called the times of the Gentiles. Jesus, of course, talked about the times of the Gentiles in Luke 21. And just in case you're not familiar, the times of the Gentiles denotes the period of Gentile world domination following God's punishment of Israel for unfaithfulness. And it lasts from the time Jerusalem was conquered in 586 BC to the end of the tribulation. So it's just about to start. There is still a kingdom of Israel. There is still a capital of Israel in Jerusalem, but within about 20 years' time, it's going to be removed. And what happens is there will be Gentile kingdoms set up during this time. And they will start out fairly good, but they'll decay as time goes by. Really, we're still in that time now. This lasts all the way until the end of the tribulation. The specific theme is Daniel's compassion and consecration elevate him during the time of the Gentiles. It elevates him, brings him to a higher level. So, there are visions that lay out the entire course of things to come. That happen sometimes even in a worldly sense. There are visions that lay out a time. Virtually all of the framers of the U.S. Constitution came from immigrant families which foresaw the American continent as a place of opportunity. Political scientist Alexis de Tocqueville foresaw that the world was leaving behind aristocracy, right, ruling nobles, and that it was coming into a new era where people were craving equality. And he saw that Russia and the United States of America would each control the destinies of half the world. America would champion an equality of freedom, Russia an equality of despotism. Isn't that interesting? People who crave equality, there's two different ways to do it. You can have freedom to become as good as you want, as good as the next guy, or you can ask for a control over everything to the point where nobody gets to rise above a certain level. And that's the danger today. So in like manner, many times throughout history, political prognosticators have foreseen many elements of the age to come. But none of these can match the prophet Daniel, who through God's inspired visions foresaw the entire course of world history, in some cases in remarkable detail. Now specifically, what we're going to prove today is compassion and consecration will triumph over the spirit of the age. We will see that Daniel met these challenges of being in these shifting and changing empires with a consecration to God and a love for his fellow man. And that's really what the crux of what we're going to talk about today. This passage shows that compassion and consecration will triumph over the spirit of any age. So number one, consecration and compassion will triumph in the age of golden authority. Right? The head of gold was the very top of this amazing idol, this statue. Isn't it appropriate that the thing that symbolizes the Gentiles is actually an idol? Daniel desires to maintain his consecration to God. In the midst of this, he says, I'm going to stay consecrated to God. So Daniel is taken captive from Jerusalem to Babylon. And in the midst of all this, you know, the people that were taken captive at this time were several thousand noblemen. They were the movers and shakers in the land of Israel. And the original plan that the Chaldeans had, that the Babylonians had, was they were going to take away the life force, the really best, and they were going to take them to Babylon. Now it tells us in verses 3 and 4 of chapter 2 that he came under the control of a man named Ashpenaz. It says, he said to them, verse chapter 1, the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and nobility. young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning. Actually, the word here is Ashpenaz was a eunuch. And from numerous citations throughout the Word of God, we really come to the reality that Daniel and his friends were made eunuchs. They were made eunuchs. So think of the situation they're in. Their national loyalty. They really don't have any hope of getting back to Israel. The return to Israel came when Daniel was pushing about 90. Their religious loyalty. They can't practice their religion any longer. Family and life calling are torn away. They can't have children. They're forced into a form of servitude, a pervasive fear, where you see through this narrative, and we skip through it quickly, there's times when Nebuchadnezzar says, if you don't tell me this, you're going to be cut to pieces. It is a very high-stress environment. It's very fearful. And not only that, but Daniel has some new health risks. You know, people that were made eunuchs don't have certain hormones in their body that keep you healthy. And so probably some of the things that they were so concerned about diet was they were eating meat that had probably been under a very high stress kind of slaughter. It was probably loaded with hormones, and it would actually sustain them. But he says, I'm not going to do that because it's unkosher, and so I am going to fast this. And God sustains them anyway. It says that the chief eunuch proved them 10 days. And after 10 days, he saw that they were doing well. He let them stay on this kind of fast that they were on. So the first lesson is, in spite of everything, Daniel says, you know what, I may have lost everything. I can't have kids. I'll never have a wife. I'm never going to have a normal life. I'll never be able to worship at the temple. Everything's been taken from me, but I'm still going to consecrate myself before God. Isn't that amazing? That is powerful. And not only that, but he exhibits a love and compassion. It says in chapter 1, verse 9, that Daniel came into, God had caused the official to show, the eunuch, the chief eunuch, to show favor and compassion to Daniel. It says that Daniel and him had real fellowship, a real favor, a real love for one another. Later on, when he's talking to King Nebuchadnezzar, you can see that he treats Nebuchadnezzar with all this respect and honor. Chapter 2, verse 24 would be the right reference. And therefore Daniel went in unto Arioch, whom the king had ordained to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus unto them, destroy not the wise men of Babylon. He treats the king with respect, goes and intercedes, but he also says, save everybody, not just me and my friends. I'm going to put my life on the line. And really, think about it, if one of these wise men had done something probably within weeks after this interpretation that had really got the king upset, Daniel's life would have been on the line. So he puts his life on the line. He has a loving, trusting relationship with these people. That's hard to do with pagans. It's hard to do with unbelievers, amen? But we have to do that. We have to win their trust. We have to be good friends to them. And we've got to stay consecrated to God if we're going to be used like this. So, what do we come to? This is done against the backdrop of an age of golden authority. Look at this. This is a nice depiction.
Yeah.
The head of gold, the arms and breasts of silver, the thighs and loins of brass, and the iron legs, and then the iron mixed with clay, and the 10 toes. And there's the stone cut out of the mountain coming, and it will destroy the whole situation. When Jesus comes back, he'll show the vanity of all of this. This is such a powerful prophecy because it shows the course of world history. Over the last 2,600 years, there hasn't been anything like this gold. It says in the prophecy, if you believe the Bible, it's saying this kind of thing does not exist any longer. It did not exist since the days of Nebuchadnezzar. God is merciful. He's the ultimate monarch. And when he set up the Gentile kingdoms, he gave such a phenomenal gift of leadership to Nebuchadnezzar. He made him an absolute king, above the law, essentially, in his own time. We'll see then, not the law of God, but above the laws of man. He could make his own laws as he went along. We'll see then that he took, we look at other kingdoms, we're going to see that none of them has this dignity. None of them has this authority. None of them reflects God the way that this head of gold did. I mean, he wasn't a godly man in many respects, but the authority, you understand what I'm saying? The authority he had in his kingdom was godly. He told somebody to do something and they did it. You know, it's hard for us to believe in this democratic age that God would say that, now think about it, if we're still in the time of the Gentiles, we're actually down here. I mean, that's God's commentary. And I mean, there's a lot of good aspects about our country. Why? Because when the country started out, we had people that were godly. They were making godly decisions. So the democracy had authority to it. It wasn't every man for himself. The democracy had authority to it. It reflected godliness to some degree, yet it wasn't quite. They say the best form of government is having a benevolent monarch. Even though Nebuchadnezzar was heavy-handed, God is saying that's still better than everybody just disrespecting authority. And frankly, you look at the world today, there is a lot of disrespect of authority. Isn't that hard to believe? I mean, this ought to be a mind blower. This should be something where we're saying, wow, God's blowing my mind with what he's revealing here. But God is saying, having a God that's almost in the realm of despotism, but if he's fair and if I'm able to deal with his heart, it reflects my glory better than where we are today. Because I really believe we're in the last times, and I think it's going to get worse. That is a mind blower. People on CNN would want to roast you alive if you said that to them. But it is what the Word of God teaches. The other kingdoms are less precious metal. Gold is far more precious than the others. It has a heavier density, a weightiness. What's that in Hebrew? Kabod, glory, right? In Hebrew, the word for weightiness, kabod, means honor and glory. There's a greater honor. Now, get a look at this. Daniel chapter 7 has some interesting things to say. When we go to Daniel chapter 7, you go over there, and you'll see in the first few verses, it talks about a parallel vision. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, the successor of Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel had a dream. Daniel saw in the night visions, he saw four beasts, right? There's four parts to this vision. He sees a confirmation many years later of four beasts. Daniel said, in my vision at night, he saw four beasts. The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground, so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it. And then he talks about some other beasts. We're going to cover those. This first beast, with the wings of an eagle, and the body and rest of the physical makeup of a lion, refers to a very elegant, noble beast. It is parallel to this. It's saying essentially the same thing. And so you put the two of them together. That we do know from the book of Daniel, chapter 4, that Nebuchadnezzar got very proud, and God made him crawl on the ground like an animal and eat grass for 7 years. But after that time, he regained his mental capacity. Really, he had had a breakdown. And had received the mind of a man and stood as a man, just like it says in that passage in Daniel chapter 7, verse 4. The first was like a lion. It had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off. It was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it. God brought him through a transformation. And in that transformation, he switched from conquest to restoring better culture. And it's interesting, isn't it, that he retained his kingdom even during these 7 years where he was out of his mind. Think of the amount of authority he must have had in order to hang on to the kingdom during that time. That is a whale of a statement. Daniel was able to deal with this awesome authority that really literally crushed or executed people. Why? Because he had reverence and consecration. We've already seen, if you go back to Daniel chapter 2, verse 27, the king says to him, are you able to make this known? Daniel answered in the presence of the king. Verse 27, it says, the secret which the king hath demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers show the king. But there is a God in heaven who revealeth secrets, and maketh known to the king, and he continues to treat the king with the respect and honor. It's that love and compassion, and coupled with fear of God, that put him head and shoulders above everybody else. It elevates him. And this kind of authority was generally passed out of our world, this authority that Nebuchadnezzar had. We've talked about how despotic he was. I wanted to share something with you again that de Tocqueville wrote, if we have it. De Tocqueville said that a democracy can serve man's best interest until the government ceases to be enabler and becomes a caretaker. Isn't that something? There is something about our culture today that we have gone from being an enabler to being a caretaker. And so, it's like what we talked about. There's that feeling of keeping everybody down. Everybody, the goal, if the goal is simply that everybody's equal, there's the idea that everybody can rise as high as they can, but everybody won't really be equal. They'll have equal opportunity, but they won't be equal. But you get obsessed with equality, you hold certain people down. De Tocqueville also wrote of men preferring equality in servitude to inequality and freedom. I think that's one of the reasons we don't understand Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar did receive Daniel, didn't he? He didn't treat Daniel the way he treated the other wise men. He said, I want somebody that can really do something. And today, that is really against our religion, so to speak. When you hold everybody down, what are you doing? You hold not only people down so that everybody's on an equal plane. De Tocqueville said it this way. Now listen what I have to say here. I didn't put this up on the board. I didn't want to overload you. But after having thus taken each individual one by one into his powerful hands, he's talking about government, and having molded him as it pleases, the sovereign power of government extends its arms over the entire society. It covers the surface of society with a network of small, complicated, minute, and uniform rules, which the most original minds and the most vigorous souls cannot break through to go beyond the crowd. They can't get out of that mold because people are only allowed to rise so high. It directs them. It rarely forces action, but it constantly opposes your acting. It does not destroy. It prevents birth. It does not tyrannize, right? It hinders. It represses. It enervates. It extinguishes. It stupefies. And finally, it reduces each nation to being nothing more than a flock of timid and industrious animals of which the government is the shepherd. Think about that. That means, in order to really carry this out, guess what? No religion can be better than another. Isn't that what we're seeing today? You say, you can't talk against another religion. Even if you want to go out and preach the truth, they'll say that is bigoted, that's false, because this attitude has come in. And so, in certain cases, a democracy that's not built on God's anointing really doesn't even measure up to the level of a dictatorship where the dictator is, exercising godly authority, right? He was about to execute all these people and probably had political reasons to do so. Think about it. If you're in a kingdom of all these soothsayers and fortune tellers, they can probably overthrow you. And he said, I don't want any of your nonsense. I want the truth. I'm not going to tell you the dream. You tell me what it is if you're really so prophetic. And so he was going to kill him. But guess what? When God moved through a man of God, he said, I'm putting everything aside because I just feel that God's touched my heart. God can use that. And at one time, our democracy was pliable enough that it was that way. But it's not any longer. Gold is, what's stiffer? Gold or silver? Gold or copper? Gold or iron? Gold is malleable. Many times you can just take pure gold and just work it right in your hands. You can work it right in your hands. Somebody handed me a beautiful piece of jewelry from Israel, and they said, it's so hot out, be very careful, just hold it flat, because you'll bend it. Because gold is so malleable. Gold is malleable. It's very conductive. It has many wonderful qualities. But guess what? People are just turning away from the gold today. They don't realize its value. They don't understand that the real thing is not about everybody having their say, but coming under godly authority. When you had Christians running the country, you had a consensus among the Christians, and people would say, I must come under this authority. because it's from God. Ultimately, it's from God. The second thing we want to talk about, consecration and compassion will triumph in the age of silver commerce. Silver, the word Hebrew kasef, means silver or it means money. Silver has almost always been identical with money. It's just been, universally the most popular coinage in many respects for at least larger denominations. So it talks about a second kingdom. The second great kingdom that is mentioned is that of the Medes and Persians. We know this from history. They talk about this chest and arms of silver. The empire involves two separate ruling cultures that never became one. They talk about it in Daniel chapter 2, verse 32. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, his chest and arms of silver, his belly and thighs of bronze. And then later on, in verse 39, Daniel says, it's not going to be as glorious as your kingdom. Silver is not as precious. It's not as malleable. It's stiffer. It's harder. It's more rigid. It's more common. It's used for more mundane purposes generally. This culture of the Medes and Persians was actually a dual empire, just like Daniel had shown. It would be a dual empire. And it never does become totally one. That shows that the authority at the head of it was lacking. So, it's very interesting. Cyrus became the king of the Persian Empire. And he was subject to the laws of the kingdom. If you read the Daniel chapter 7, it compares it to a great bear. A great bear that has 3 ribs in its mouth. And something very interesting arises. There's your bear. Who ruled the Babylonian area he was the Mede that was under King Cyrus. It says this, then these men assembled unto the king and said to the king, know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is that no decree, no statute which the king establishes may be changed. So they go to the king and they wanted something to happen. And they said, we're in trouble because the king himself can't change the law. So what happens? You're already at a lesser degree of authority. This king, that succeeded the Babylonian kingdom, could not change the laws he had made. He was under the law. He had a lesser degree of authority. He was more rigid. They were starting to trust the system more than trusting there would be somebody who would be anointed to hear from God. In the book of Esther, they talk about the fact that and seal it with the king's ring, for the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring may no man reverse. Do you realize what this was about? In the 8th chapter of Esther, they found out that Haman was trying to kill the Jews, but they couldn't change the edict that the Jews would die, so they made a new edict that they were allowed to defend themselves. Why? Because they sort of trust the system more than they trust in somebody to hear from God. And so the whole attitude was that there was nobody that could really hear God's will. We have to trust these laws. And so even the king was under the law. It was a lesser degree of authority. Cultures that get like that get hamstrung. They pass a law, and then they don't know what to do with the law, and it ends up being like a millstone around their neck and just taking them to the bottom of the pool. And that is a sign that happens in many cultures. Really, it's happening today in America. I think it's very interesting. How do we know that what Daniel did back in the time of Nebuchadnezzar, because by this time Nebuchadnezzar's dead, his son reigned, then he died in this war where they took them, and now the whole thing is under the Medes and the Persians. Well, guess what? Daniel's still alive. And there comes a place, and we're not going to go there, but in the 6th chapter of Daniel, some people were really jealous that this guy, who was a Jew, who didn't even belong in the Babylonian kingdom, comes into the Persian and Mede kingdom, and he has a lot of favor with the king, and they want him dead, and they end up catching him praying to his God. They throw him in a lion's den. But the king loves this guy. Why? Because Daniel loved him. And Daniel is spared from the lions. Why? Because he's consecrated. He's a consecrated man. He's consecrated before God. And so God spares him. This idea of loving your fellow man, even in spite of their flaws, and being consecrated before God, it works. It'll get you through. We need people like that today. In the midst of all of the We don't think our society is falling apart. We don't think it's decaying. But guess what? According to the Bible, it is. The authority in the world today we're much worse off than they were in Nebuchadnezzar's time. And we think we're so advanced. We say, well, now everybody's equal. Well, you know what? Equality is not the thing. It's being free. To be all that you can be. And if somebody's something better, you know what? You've got to be able to trust that God gave them to you as a resource. Daniel doesn't quibble over that. He probably wasn't the most talented person, but he could hear God, and he could love his fellow man. And so he changed the world. Isn't that incredible? Number 3, consecration and compassion will triumph in the age of brass carnality. So we've seen an age where you had absolute authority, maybe to the point of being proud. And then you have this silver where, the funny thing is, let me just go back here. The arms and chest of silver equate with this bear. Historians say that when Cyrus and Darius went out to war, they had such a huge army, they weren't tactical geniuses. They could come on the horizon with this huge army, and they would say, surrender, agree to pay us a certain amount of money. You see where the silver comes in? It was this kind of silver empire. They had it made because they had big numbers. And they were trusting God to a certain degree. Cyrus did a lot of things that God wanted him to do. But he wasn't in that place of really hearing God like Nebuchadnezzar was. He was relying on his troops. And so he'd say, it's commercial. Pay me the silver and you'll become a vassal state and everything will be okay. But then we move on to a new problem. We went from the heady times of gold and authority that could cause ego problems, pride. Then we get into the silver commerce that warred against God's divine order. And then finally, we come to the time of Alexander the Great. It's his empire is compared to brass. They see this part here would correspond to the next empire, and we know from history it was Alexander the Great. And we know that the reddish hue of bronze or copper or brass, the same words are used for all three, usually recalls the flesh and sin. People are ruddy. Basically. Some people have more pigment than others, but we're basically ruddy. We're reddish. And in the Bible, redness is always a type of the flesh. This picture of the kingdom of Greece under Alexander the Great was witnessed by history. And it's very interesting that if you want a picture of what brass or copper or bronze is all about, the altar of sacrifice, where the flesh of animals that died in our place was offered up on brazen altar. The brazen altar of the temple was the place where sin offerings were made and the flesh of sacrifice was consumed in fire. Guess what? Samson and King Zedekiah had their eyes put out as punishment for carnality, and both were bound with fetters of brass. Right? It's a type of carnality. It's what the flesh does. It follows its appetites. And Alexander, there's a lot of debate about where Alexander, there are times where his temper is out of control. We know from history. There's times where his drinking is out of control. There's times where his sexuality is out of control, although none of these seem to master him. But what really mastered him, he had an appetite for power. And he wanted to win and to keep expanding his empire. So that by the age of 32 when he died, he had one of the vastest empire anybody had ever seen. And it was all driven. There are a lot of beliefs that he and his mother murdered his own father. He had such a phenomenal appetite for power. And she was reputed to be a witch. And yet, when he came to Jerusalem, because he was very superstitious and did fear God, but without knowledge, he did great obeisance to the high priest. He really held him in high esteem because he knew that this man had the Spirit of God. He didn't know what God. But he was at least God-fearing, although he was very fleshy. Daniel chapter 7, verse 6 speaks of a leopard with 4 heads and 4 wings, symbolizing this empire that's carnal. And it's very interesting. The leopard, there's a leopard, fearsome, isn't it? The leopard symbolizes the light army that Alexander had. His army was small. He was a tactical genius. Even though he would go in with far fewer troops, he would move so fast and do such cunning things, he would defeat. He was brilliant. To this day, I bet you all know that there are, you go back in military history, there's a lot of people who became generals. Guess what their first name was? Alexander. We just had Alexander Haig, right? That's a big military name. People have always admired Alexander the Great. He was so brilliant militarily. And that's what leopards are. They rely on their cunning. They're not big like a lion, but they're very powerful. And their rounded head actually has a bite that's more powerful than a lion. Not long ago, there was one leopard in Africa that actually killed 400 people. 400 human beings before it was finally stopped. Why? Because they couldn't even know it was there. It just kind of snuck in and snuck out. And Alexander was a very carnal person. He relied on his earthly cunning to get what he wanted. And he had basically insatiable appetites. We see that today. I think we have all four types of these kingdoms here to some measure today. Although it's sad to say we're coming up to where everything is getting more and more like the last kingdom we're going to look at. But think about it. Will loyalty, will compassion and love, and consecration to God work under circumstances where you have a kingdom like this? Will it work? Well, the good news, it will. Daniel wasn't around by the time that Alexander came along. But Alexander left a legacy in the Greek world where he put an imprint on the Greek world. That's the way they fought war. That's the way they did business. They had that leopard kind of mentality. Guess what? There was a Jewish guy that had the teachings of Daniel that went in and totally changed the Greek world. His name was Apostle Paul. He came in 1 Corinthians chapter 13:5, he tells us love does not seek its own way. He preached that, and we still have those words today. Because people in Corinth and all over the Greek world, they accepted what he had to say. Then he goes on in 1 Corinthians 6, he speaks at length about maintaining consecration. Telling the Corinthians, but you're washed, you're sanctified. Don't give in to your fleshly appetites. That worked it worked for Daniel, and it worked for Paul, and it worked for you. Even when you're in an age, and some things about our age are just like they have the appetite of a leopard. They have insatiable appetite. Imagine that, killing and eating 400 human beings. And who knows what else havoc wreaked with cattle and other things. But God has a way of dealing with even that. Then, of course, there's a final empire. Consecration and compassion will triumph in the age of iron force. Now, today we would not think. Most people would say, well, we're not in that age. We're so sophisticated. We're so genteel. Guess what? The Bible says we are. The fourth kingdom of the Gentile age is Rome. Because we know historically it was Rome. It mentions his legs and feet of iron, and then iron mixed with clay. And when they get into, there it goes, there's our friend again. Look at here, this is a really nice depiction of the iron and clay. Daniel chapter 2, verse 33. Let me read that to you one more time. His legs of iron, his feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, and not of human hands. It struck the statue. The entire statue, all the things that are leading up to this, just collapse. They just get small as chaff and they're blown away. And then you go down to verses 40 through 44, where Daniel is giving the interpretation of that part of the vision. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. It will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. And it talks about that stone crushing the feet of that image and eventually undoing the whole image. It depicts Rome, which is the next thing in human history. It's the next thing in the time of the Gentiles. Rome was a republic for the first 400 years of its period of expansion. It's very interesting when you look at Rome because, most of these kingdoms lasts for a decade or two or a couple hundred years. Rome goes from around 400 B or 200 BC up to the current time. It's lasted over 2,000 years in a sense. Why? Because guess what the laws of the United States are based on? They're based on Roman law. They're based on Roman law. Rome was ruled by a voting class, right? It was originally a republic. What was America founded as? It was founded as a republic. Later it became an empire, beginning with Julius Caesar, but just like a shadow government. You had these people that were from the Republican era, they were very, very adept and crafty, and nobody really had absolute authority in Rome. There was a constitution and laws that limited the power of the emperor. So he was not by any means an absolute ruler. And so it was very rigid, just like iron is rigid. Think of copper. It can be drawn out very easily into wire. It's ductile. It's malleable to some degree. Iron is not very malleable. It's very brittle. If you don't heat treat it just right, you can just shatter it. And so the Roman emperor never had total sway. In the U.S., like I said, our laws are based on British law, which in turn is based on Roman law. Most democracies around the world today have a strong resemblance to the Roman Republic, though they are generally democracies. In a republic, only certain people have the right to vote. You have to own property or some other qualifier. But nevertheless, even though and guess what? Common people are compared to clay. So you have the strength of a republic combined with the clay of a democracy, because everybody pretty much gets the right to vote. And that's where we're at today. We are in an era where it talks, in one case, Daniel chapter 7, it talks about them mingling with the seed of men. The people that are called to be rulers really are serving the masses, because everybody has the right to vote. And nobody really embraces a very high-minded religion. The religion today is everybody should have what they want. That's basically the religion of this world. And so guess what? The rulers aren't very strong, even though they have the potential of being strong. Even though that Roman law was very rigid and strong. The kingdom and age of the Gentiles has slowly evolved to the lowest common denominator and reflects almost nothing of a constituted authority, reflecting God's absolute rulership. That's what they're saying here in this passage. De Tocqueville said democracy will continue to exist until they realize they can vote themselves generous gifts out of the public treasury. Am I speaking against democracy? No. I'm saying that unless you have people that have some kind of authority in their life, you really don't have a ghost of a chance of having a democracy. You really have no authority. You just end up with mob rule. Because everybody's saying, this is what we want, give us what we want, we'll vote you out of office. At one time, a political candidate could get up and say, look, this is ungodly, it's unbiblical, I won't do it, and you should be ashamed, and people would repent. And he was almost, they talk about the bully pulpit as being a tool of politicians. That they could get up and they say, listen, folks, this is not dissent. America needs to come up. The preachers would say, listen to the president, listen to the senator. That's not going on today. People are saying, whatever you want to do, as long as you feel good about it, it's okay. And we are coming to a place where it's the lowest point in the age of the Gentiles. And we are ready to be struck by that rock that's going to make everything disintegrate. In Daniel chapter 7, verses 7 and 8, let me read it to you. It talks about, you have the legs and feet of iron mixed with clay, and over here you have a beast with iron teeth. And listen to what it says. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a fourth beast, terrifying and frightening, and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. Guess what? Today, there are certain principles that if you cross them, you will be trampled to death. Even if you have the mind of God, they will not listen to somebody that comes forth with a word from God. Everybody is looking for what they consider right. They have their own set of laws. Generally, it's based on the idea of equality, but an equality that basically is not calling people up and saying, it's not equal opportunity, but everybody's supposed to be equal. All religion's supposed to be equal. All philosophies are equal. It's really madness. A restatement of this beast is found in Revelation chapter 13 and chapter 17. Guess what happens in Revelation chapter 13? A beast rises up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And so it's just like the 7-headed beast that's talked about here, and it talks about horns, and it is in some way a compilation of all the other beasts, and it has on its head the name of blasphemy. And it says, and the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, his feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth is the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. And so you have this a restatement. It has 7 heads. The 7 heads are figurative of various eras of world history. But the number 10, is a very key number. It signifies, let me go. I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-covered beast full of maize about having 7 heads and 10 horns. What does the 10 identify with? It identifies with that image of gold and silver and brass and iron, and what's down at the bottom? 10 toes that are mixed with clay. And here, the same beast is described as an animal. The same era is described in Revelation. Remember, Rome has never gone away. Its ruling philosophy is still with us. And 10 horns, 7 heads and 10 horns. The horns are leaders. 10 is the ideal number to human beings. We count 10. 10 fingers, 10 toes. 12 is the ideal number to God. Godly government is always based on 12. When people really think that they have the ideal government, they have a rulership based on 10. It seems so neat. It may not be exactly 10 people, but what the principle here is saying is indicating a man-made government. That probably, according to Revelation, this thing actually gets to the place where it rules the earth. And what? The toes are separate. It says they don't cleave to one another. Right? It says that down at the bottom, Daniel chapter 2, says that the 10 toes do not cleave to one another, and even the clay and the iron doesn't cleave to one another. It's the final form of Rome will be a true coalition with separations. Its toes are separate and headed by 10 distinct rulers or more. It seems very similar in concept to an alliance of nations for the purpose of world rulership, cooperation or peace, but it will be based on tyranny of masses. Everybody will be saying, nobody gets to go beyond this level. We are all equal. And they're not listening to God saying, this is my son. They're saying, well, who's Jesus more than Buddha? Who's Jesus more than Muhammad? Who's Jesus more than Krishna? It's this whole idea of equality, putting a glass ceiling. And somebody that hears from God, they'll say, well, guess what? You have your 5 minutes. If a prophet arises, they won't listen. Because they say, guess what? Unless you speak in the name of all the people, you're not speaking. And so nothing will be allowed to excel other ideas or concepts. Christianity and God's promises to Israel will be seen as inequality. Today, Christians are seen as bigots. Today, Israel is seen like, well, what makes you think that you have a right to this land simply because a God you have in your Bible, your book? Well, there's all kinds of books in the world. So even though this country was built on what's said in your book, we deny it because it's not equality. The entire apparatus to screen out God's anointing on the church in Israel will fall into the hands eventually of a single ruler. There'll be a single ruler who will come and basically take control of this whole world order. The Bible says that there will be these 10 horns, and what? One little horn comes up and displaces 2 others. Well, guess what? If it's a 10 rulership conspiracy or confederacy, and you get 2 other guys to go on your side, you are now in control. That's all it will take. It'll be like somebody coming to the United Nations and having several other people with them that are going to vote the way they do, and they take control of the whole apparatus, and they just come against the things of God. All of the governments set up by these kingdoms will be done away with when Christ comes. There will be this rock, carved out of a mountain without hands. God himself will do it. It is Messiah. It's Jesus. It's his church. Jesus will come back. He'll strike this idol in the feet. It'll all come tumbling down. In these last days, the key is still this consecration. And it's still walking in the love of Jesus. This consecration, 2 Corinthians 5:21 says it this way. For he hath made him to be sin for us who knew no sin, that we might be made the righteousness of God in him. We have to walk like Jesus walked. We have to let him walk in us. We will overcome. You can be a Daniel. Even in this age, you can be a Daniel with that kind of consecration. And it says we need to walk in this life. Luke 23:34. Then said Jesus, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they parted his raiment and cast lots. They took even the very clothes off his back. But Jesus was filled with love and compassion. That's basically the story, friends. You know, the age that we're in some ways, is an amalgamation of this kind of pride. It's the amalgamation of this kind of commercial attitude. It's an amalgamation of this kind of carnal, feeding the appetites. And it's an amalgamation of this kind of force. It's a brutal force because there's no heart to it. People say, these are the rules, you have to obey these rules, or you're toast. It's more brutal than King Nebuchadnezzar. It's more brutal than Alexander the Great. And we just think of it as, well, they're just rules. They're rules of equality. But guess what? Your head starts bumping up there. You say, I've got a message from God. It's brutal. But it can be overcome with the love of God manifest in us and with consecration of God. Well, heads are bowed and eyes are closed. Perhaps our musicians will come forward and minister to us. Lord, we just thank you for this kind of anointing that we can have.